Hey guys, what's up? All right. It's Double Deuce back. Today, our video is going to be on the TOYAN FS100 methanol engine. There's been so many videos out there of this thing torn apart and how to tear it apart and yada yada yada. But nobody's really got inside and got detailed and started measuring things. Like, for instance, bearing sizes, what do you got on the connecting rod, your valve train, which I did not tear apart because I didn't really have to. But what I'm going to do is give you guys kind of an overlook on everything that I had to go through with this motor and, some of the maintenance tips that they suggest. And if you have problems with the motor, what they say to do. So stay tuned, and here we go. Alrighty, so now, I'm going to start off with kind of an overview here. This is your lower crankcase, okay? This is the rear of it. This is the front with the nipple, okay? This is what it looks like inside. And you can see mine's just juiced up. And this is your cylinder head and camshaft assembly and carburetor and your glow plug all in one. And when you turn the valves, you turn the camshaft, the valves pop. Okay. Now, one important thing, I've seen a lot of people fumbling on their videos of taking the exhaust off the thing. It's a simple process. I mean, you basically, on the bottom of the muffler itself, or boost box they call it, I'll get it out and show it to you real quick. Now, when you look at the boost box here, this is your muffler, okay? There's the back side of it. You see there's a round hole in there. Now, what you have to do is you have to unbolt these two bolts on the bottom down here and remove these side cover screws. When you do that, now the thing, it's loose, and you'll be able to get access to, it's kind of like a ferrule nut right there. If you just take a plain tip, get a little focus on this thing here, get a plain tip screwdriver and unscrew the thing, and then the muffler comes right off. Give you a look at everything. And you can see the, your carburetor setup. Everything's all juiced up because I had a few problems with it, and I contacted Engine DIY, and I haven't heard back yet some things. So, and long story short, I said I would do it myself, like I've done everything else in my life. Now, if you see up here, or down here, I'm going to put this on the very bottom. On the very bottom, right there, you'll see a little round mark right there. Okay, that's your timing mark. All right. Now, they do tell you in the manual. Now, when you get the engine, you get this manual, but it's all written in different languages, Chinese, and in some English. You can't really read it. So they sent a photocopy, pretty much, I think, of the same thing, telling you it's pretty thick. It's pretty thorough too. All right, they tell you a lot of stuff on here, like maintenance tips and all that stuff. How to care for it and how to store it, and some contact information. Now we get the head out of the way. We'll set that over here in the boost box. All right. Now this is your cylinder. All right. There's the underside of it. Now you see how thick them ribs are on there? I'm kind of one of these things run really hot, and the thicker your ribs are, the more heat they're going to hold. If they were a little thinner, I think it would probably cool down a little quicker. It would cool down a little quicker with the fan, because the fan just sits on here with a bearing, and it runs off the belt, as everybody knows. Now there's the top of the cylinder case. All right, and now this here this here is like an in-between plate. Okay, this is your basically your upper saddle for your crankshaft. You got your upper, and then you got your lower you know, case. All right, so then this sits on top of that like so, and now you see everything starts stacking up. So I tell you, the reason I tore the thing apart was because I was getting massive amounts of oil coming out of this thing, and I tried leaning it out, and then it wouldn't run right, and then I would richen it up and it would run really well, but man, it was like, I mean, the oil was just it was a mess. Like the car was just soaked underneath my my RC. So I'll get to that in a second. Now this is your back half of your crankshaft. All right, it's got two bearings on it. It's got a flange bearing, a spacer, and it's a regular bearing. Okay, now these bearings are, I believe, 8mm by 16. We'll check it right now. Zero it out. Yeah, we know what to do the front one, because that's the one with the that's the one that's accessible to measure the shaft with. Okay, so you got a basically an 8mm center and 16 outer, and it's a flange bearing. It is sealed. It's a rubber sealed bearing. You know, so they didn't cheap out on, you know, I guess you know, putting some good stuff in the motor. So a lot of people saying it had cheap bearings in it, and which, I mean, depends on I'll get to this in a second. It depends on where they got the bearings from. Now, I've noticed a lot of my kits that I've gotten from China, the bearings fail in them like suddenly, and some, you know, some will last and some just blow apart. So with this kit here, I was a little worried about the bearings in it and wanted to kind of inspect them, because bearings don't last forever. Everybody knows that. If you're most of the guys that run your professional buggy series and their mains and all that stuff, they're constantly rebuilding their motors and putting new bearings in them, because like clutch bearings take a beating really bad. They wear out. So bearings are a part of the maintenance for this motor, depending on how many, you know, tanks of fuel or hours you got on the motor. Now, the crankshaft is a two-piece crankshaft that pins together like so, and it's got a set screw on the thing, but there's no flat spot to, so you have to set this in the case and center it, then tighten your grub screw down. Now my grub screw was loose when I pulled it out. There's a lot of loose things on this motor from the vibration and the heat and all that that I had trouble with. And when I first got the motor, I've had many messages about this engine of problems they've had with it. So just to touch on like three of the first problems, one was bearing failure in the rod. Okay, this has a little 5x8 micro bearing in here, and you know, it's a gold shielded bearing. It actually looks like the Traxxas bearings to me, because they have that gold shield in them, but that doesn't mean nothing, because nobody knows where Traxxas gets them at. And like I say, this one here, these are okay. This one was kind of locked on the shaft. I'm glad I tore it apart, because this was frozen right on the shaft and wasn't spinning at all, and it was spinning inside my rod here, which you can, if you look inside, you'll see where it was spinning in there. So I'm going to have to do something with that and figure it out. Now, when I first got my motor, I fired it up, and I was trying. I don't know what the break-in is. From what I understand, they test all these, and so they're ready to go when I come out of the box. But some of the problems that like I say, I've heard about is the rocker arm right here. There's a rocker arm bar that has an Allen screw that holds it in, right in there. That came loose, so that's why mine wouldn't run. Okay, so if you have problems, with the thing not starting or something, there's some things you check. You check your glow plug. You check to make sure your fuel's good, because if your fuel's no good, it ain't gonna fire. Make sure that your carb settings are what they say, like 1.5 millimeter at an idle and all that stuff. Make sure it's not closed completely. And basically, another thing you can check for is your timing. Your timing marks should be both pointing straight down. This is the front belt thing. You see the little mark on there on the very bottom. So these should be straight down when you, when you're setting your timing according to them. So this this is your lower pulley, and it has a 2 millimeter pin that goes through the crankshaft, for your belt to ride on. I'm trying to, not miss nothing here. And we'll measure the bore in the cylinder and see what we get for a quick measurement. I'm coming up at about 1660. So that's your bore. Now, the piston itself, it's an aluminum piston, steel bore. It looks like stainless steel. It's really hard. I noticed that. One of the gentlemen that was kind of going through me with some of the problems that he had with his, it's Black LA Mass on YouTube. He actually come up with a wicked cool 6-wheeler crawler. So the parts are, they're high quality parts. The motor's got, it's a gift to the RC world, this engine, and because it's different. So getting back to why I tore mine apart was I was getting excessive oil out of this thing, and I couldn't figure it out. So I had fired it up, and I had kind of set the settings, where it ran good, which was on the rich side, and I was running 15% nitro with 18% castor. Okay, now these seem to run better with castor oil. I've tried the the 20%, 25% with synthetic oils in them, and they don't really give you an amount of whatever the oil's in it, but they seem to have more power, but the idle is really erratical, and it stalls a lot. So I went to the castor, and it was instantaneously stable, and so I've been running that. Now I've ran about 2 gallons of fuel through this engine, okay, and there's constant maintenance. You gotta keep greasing your rocker arms and stuff in between so many runs. Make sure your carb's cleaned out and your air filter's clean. So that right there, and saying all that, it's just regular maintenance on a motor. So I don't want them to get a bad rap, but then again, with a couple of little changes on this thing, they could own the show here. And it's the like I say, my buddy there, he, once he figured his out, like he said, it was a breath of fresh air to the RC hobby with his motor. It's not super powerful, but then again, it has a lot of torque. And once you get your gearing set up on your, on your project, it's like, it'll be, you'll be happy with it. Now, Steve from RC Tanks and Trucks, he's done 2, rigs with this here, 2 of his own projects. And, you know, he just recently did a semi-truck, which is pretty cool. And, you know, it shows them running around, and, you know, they're very, very good engines. So just every now and then, some of them have some problems with overheating, excessive oil, and they have idle problems. Now, what we figured out with Black LA Mass's motor, the bearings blew apart in the crankshaft. Totally blew right out of it. And for the simple reason, and mine was probably on its way because it's seized up. They probably seize, overheat, and then blow apart. And there's a bunch of shrapnel inside this crankcase. It was a mess. What he did was, he actually put a bronze bushing in the big end of the rod, like most nitro motors have. And, you know, it stayed because he said it was a sick engine, so, which means it wasn't idling properly. And he put up a couple of videos for me to see, and like the idle, you couldn't tune the thing because the piston wasn't coming up to the top end. It was coming up late. It was rattling all over the place in there, and you couldn't get a nice steady flow through the engine with the rod banging around down there. So his messed up the crankcase and all that stuff. So one thing he found out was the pin on the cranks, it's heat treated, but it's not hardened. Okay, so, you know, if you put a bronze bushing in this here, you're going to have to put some kind of a hardened sleeve, you know, over that, so you don't wear that out. But so when I was investigating my oil spooge, okay, I determined it's one of 2 things. One is too much crankcase pressure from this tiny, tiny little nipple that they got in here. You know, it's like a 16th hole in this thing. It's real tiny. And because I just sat and ran it and just brought the RPMs up and watched it, and what I seen was this: the oil itself was just flowing out of this bearing. It was just blowing out of it like crazy, which tells me there was a lot of pressure in the crankcase. And now I don't know what the break-in period for these motors are, but I figure a couple of gallons of fuel, I should have, you know, it should be seated by now. So the shielded bearing seems to work okay, but it's coming in between the your crankshaft and the bearing where it rolls on top of it here. That's where the oil's gushing out of. If you happen to catch Steve from RC Tanks and Trucks, he just bought a V4, and he's running it, and it's running a little rich because he just fired it up, and those things use fuel pretty good. It'll blow through a half a tank of fuel in, I mean, just a few minutes. But I noticed on his too, at the very front of the motor, on the bottom of the display box it was running on, the fuel was just dumping out in like blobs out there. And the problem I was having was the same thing that Black LA Mass was having, with so much oil coming out on your timing belt. Okay, your fan, you know, you have a pulley here for your belt to tension it, and it's non-adjustable. It goes in one place and that place only. And so what was happening, the oil was all over the fan pulley, and you could actually hold the thing because there was so much oil on it, and the fan wasn't doing anything. So it wasn't actually blowing anything on the motor to cool it. So I don't know how I'm going to rectify this. I'm going to try to put a rubber O-ring in the front to maybe slow it down a little bit, and you know, see if I can, you know, basically, you know, try to come up with a seat of the pants fix. There are 2 O-rings that set on these shielded bearings here, that set inside your crankcase and your upper cover saddles, that shield these up here. Now I thought about putting a thicker one in there, but it ain't gonna happen because there, you know, unless you order a special, I guess, O-ring for them, because this O-ring is just about 1 millimeter thick. So it is like, It is super thin, you know. And the other O-rings that I got about 7 boxes of O-rings, and I couldn't come up with one that was that small. And so that's going to be I guess a venture down the road where I'll go back to Engine DIY and see if I can get they do sell like a gasket kit for the thing. And I imagine over time these are going to get hard and shrink and crack and all that stuff. And I've had a lot of people who've tore their engines down already say that the O-rings were cut in there. So, but so that's to be determined. But one thing I do want to say about tearing this thing apart on your own, I mean, I imagine there, you know, everybody does it. That's the hobby. But they stress in their, you know, their booklet here to use professional tools and all that, and to know what you're doing. A lot of guys out there, you know, are in the hobby, know what they're doing. But if you just get this motor and it's not running right and you tear it apart, you know, putting it back together, you know, you have to be sure everything's right, because they spend a lot of time on this. And so I did find out the belt sizes are different between your cam belt and your starter belt. As I had ordered, I thought it was an extra cam belt, and this actually is a starter belt. So, you know, I'm gonna have to contact them over there at you know, Engine DIY or Sterling Kit, and see if I can get the gasket kit for it. Now this gasket here goes in between your two sections of your crankcase and your cylinder block. There is no gasket in between these two. These are a machine surface. There was no gasket in between these two that rode the crank. The only seals that were in it were the O-rings. But so far, like I say, once you get some of these problems debugged out of it, you know, I mean, I've had a lot of fun with the engine, don't get me wrong. But you know, like I even looked at ways to hop it up for performance, like, you know, high lift camshafts on a 4-stroke engine. You know, the more air you can pump through it, the more power you make. But one thing I did notice, if you look on here, I'll give you a side angle. When you turn this, the valves, they open up to the point where you can't even shave the head down. So they've done all this work for you. You see, there you go. There's your intake valve, or your exhaust valve, I mean. And there's your intake valve. Now, if you look down there, it comes, you know, right to, you know, the top of the ring, because this is recessed in here for your cylinder to set in here. And when this is in here like that, now your you know, your piston only has so much room. So you, as far as building any kind of compression out of the motor or a high lift camshaft, they've done that already. And so any upgrades that I could see to be done to the motor would be, you know, maybe upgrade the bearings in it. I've heard different things about different bearing companies. I don't know which ones they use, and I don't know any torque specs on the motor. I can't find any. You'd think there would be some kind of a, you know, a torque spec where you could use a torque wrench on it, you know, like 1/4-inch torque wrench, and snug things down so it's all even. But some of the older nitro engines and stuff, you know, everybody just kind of put them together by hand and gave them a crank, and that was good enough. So, like I say, I'm going to try to put a couple of O-rings to seal that problem up. One idea I did have was to, I don't know how much pressure these things require to run. I would think that any kind of, you know, pressure that's built up in here that can't get out this tube, because there's quite a bit of oil that comes out this tube in your catch cup. It's got to be reflected back up to your piston on the top, and it's got to be pressurizing that piston. Even when it fires, it's got to have some kind of resistance because there's too much pressure. So I'm going to experiment with this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take and put a bigger nipple, okay, in the thing, and I want to try to take the hose instead of running it down to the catch cup. I want to put the catch cup on top of the valve cover and try it that way. And I want to see how much comes up to the catch cup. It should, you know, no matter where that hose is, whether it's down or up, it should put the same amount of oil out of it. And my thought was, what if you drilled a nipple over here to come in to your valve cover and lubricate your camshaft and your valve train, because it does expel quite a bit of oil. And then on this side there's a recession down in this case where the camshaft sets in here. So basically down here somewhere on the side, you know, there's really nothing on the side of the motor but the starter. You could put a nipple here to drain it out. And then that could go to your catch cup. That way there, the oil would be coming out of the crankcase into the top of the motor and then out, you know, and then you're getting use out of it because, you know, the casters and stuff seem to be doing, you know, well for lubricating the cylinder wall, the piston rings, and, you know, all the bearings. I don't see why it wouldn't work good on this up here. So that's one of my upgrades I'm going to do on mine. One thing I did want to say, they do have a very good, I guess, service program, but they sometimes they'll get back to you really fast, sometimes they don't. But the thing is, you know, if you bought it from them, then basically you're in with the company. But if you buy it somewhere else, from what I understand by reading the directions, you know, you're going to have to send it back to that person you got it from, who got it from them. From what I understood in these, you know, they're going to give you first class service if you bought it directly from Sterling Kit or Engine DIY. But if you bought it on eBay or something like that, that's what I understand. They're, you know, it's only, I guess this way here, they know they can control who sold it and all that stuff. I guess they'll know a little bit of history about the motor maybe, and go from there. But so anywho, like I say, any questions, comments, if you guys got some ideas on some of this stuff, throw it out there in the comment, and we'll go from there. So anyway, like, I think that's about all I had to say on this segment. So we'll be catching you guys later, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. So thanks for watching. Adios.